Hello and welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. My name is Axel and I'm the host of the Ideal Investor Show, where we show you the path to early retirement. Chris, thank you for being on our podcast, one of the very first guests here to come on the show. And I want to thank you again for having me on your show. So for our audience, maybe you could do me a favor to introduce yourself real quick, what you do, and people who know me will find out we are not that far apart. So over to you.
I love it. Well, first of all, I love that your prosperity mindset, Axel, that to do that, because that's what I do and I love it. So thank you for having me on. I'll condense 30 years in the shortest time frame I can right now. But I'll be brief, and then you could pull me back to any part of that. I've been at this 30 years this month, actually, 30 years to be exact, and a lot of good things and a lot of challenging things, right? So I went from building homes back in the early 90s, and we did that all on terms. I didn't even know I was doing it then, but we did it all on terms without banks and investors. And then I bought a realty executives franchise, kind of strapped my broker owner hat on, if you will, back in like 95. I ultimately sold that to Coldwell Banker in 2000. Okay. That was a good experience. From that point on, however, running up to the lovely real estate crash, the debacle I call it in my book, there were good times in there. We did condominium conversions where we take multi-units and convert them to condos. We did commercial deals, we did land deals. The challenge was when the light switch literally was flipped in February of 08, everything came to a screeching halt. Everybody's a different month. Mine, I can tell you, was February of 08. And that taught me some valuable lessons. It was painful for a lot of reasons, but mainly because I signed personally on loans. And then the banks came look at the market, went down by a third. In some markets, 2/3 dropped in one of my projects. So it was an ugly time. But out of that was born what we do today. We buy everything on terms, meaning creative real estate. We do it either lease purchase, owner financing, or subject to existing financing. That's all we do. And therefore, we control somewhere around the country right now, and a little bit across the border in Canada. We control around 80 million in real estate with our students and ourselves. And none of that is large deposits. In fact, a majority of it will be $10 deposits. We can talk about this why, but they're very, very small, if any, money put into these deals. So that's 30 years in 5 minutes, and I can go fast because I'm from New England.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely cool. One thing that I think might be interesting, because even though we're talking mainly, it's the Ideal Investor Show, so naturally we're talking about investing, but I think there's a somewhat unique thing that you do, and that is really including your family, and anybody who marries somebody seems like it's pulled in as well. So can you say a little bit of word about how that came about and what your experience is with that?
Yeah, no, good question. So when I started back, my first sort of laser focused do only terms deals was 2013. So it took me 4 years to dig out of that mess I told you about. That brought me to 12. I got the infrastructure set up systems wise. I had no money. I was just setting things up system wise. And then in 13, I started. In 14, my son was a realtor. He saw everything, Nick, he saw everything I did during the crash. He was right next to me in the office. He heard the creditors calling. He heard the IRS. He heard everything, good, bad, and otherwise. And so around the fall of 14, it was November of 14, I remember the deal. I said, look, can you help me on the buyer side? I can secure these deals, but can you help me get these sold to some deserving, qualified rent-to-own buyers? And so he started online and doing that for me in fall of 14. In the fall of 15, my son-in-law, Zach, and my daughter, Kayla, were in the personal training and bartending business. We live in a tourist area, actually, in Newport, Rhode Island. So it's crazy good money for them, but the lifestyle's awful, right? You work in ungodly hours. So they said, look, we're trying to get out of it. It's just beating us up physically. And is there anything that we could do here? And I said, well, there's no salary, no free lunch, but if you want to come in and you want to start doing deals, I'll train you. Kayla and Nick grew up in real estate. Obviously, my son-in-law did not. And so fast forward now to where we are today, we have a very large coaching business around North America. Zach is part owner of that company, as is Nick. Zach kind of duplicated me in the property world, where he knows how to go out and get properties now. He's handled hundreds of transactions. Nick still stays in the lane of the buyer specialist. So they all have their lanes. Kayla has 2 awesome kids now, my grandkids, so she's not with us anymore. She dabbles in a few things, but by and large had to move away from being the kind of the general manager. But here's what I'll say about the roles, and then I can be quiet. You can ask anything to go back. They all were grown organically, Axel. It's like people say to me, well, how did you come up with this plan? I said, no, just like I just told you, it just kind of happened. And then nobody stepped on each other's toes because they all wanted a different lane. Like, I'm good at this, I want to do this. I'm good at this, I want to do this. And so luckily that's what happened organically. And then the team started developing around us. So now we run the property acquisition and selling business, and we run the coaching business concurrently because it keeps us super, super current in the marketplace, and people can count on that.
Right, great. Yeah, thank you for describing that. I mean, one of the things that I've seen people ask me, and I wouldn't be surprised if they ask you the same thing every once in a while, is that as you build, from an investor's perspective, as you build a portfolio and go beyond like 1, 2, maybe 3 properties, it is still passive depending on how you're doing it, whether we use your strategy or my strategy, which are ultimately relatively similar. There is still something to be done. And people ask me, well, if I have my wife help me, or maybe one of my older kids help me, how do we, handle this kind of money making, ultimately, what I call the time freedom point, where you can maybe in majority of your income on the passive income side and no longer have to exchange time for money. So how do you handle that when you bring in family members into this, more or less to say, okay, where's the line where here we do business and there we do family? Or is it kind of murky line? Or what's your secret to make that work without having too much friction?
Yeah, no, very good question. So here's kind of I always like to tell you stories that happen, so it's real instead of just theory, right?
Right.
So we had an office building at that time when everybody was there. We were renting at that time. We own our own building now, but we were renting. And right behind the building, like 1 block up, was my place, Nick's place, and diagonally across the street, Caleb and Zach's place. Like, we literally could walk to the office. What we would do is leave the office though and come home at night, and we'd literally yell across, "How was your day?" Like it was a separate world.
Yeah.
And now we don't now, only because we don't live next to each other, but we live in the same town still. But we literally would do that and have a good chuckle. Secondly, we get together a lot with family. We're close, 2 or 3 times a week. And so we make it a point we'll celebrate wins and we'll say some positive things if they're there. But we will never bring baggage or drama to a family discussion, even if we're sitting alone and everybody else is inside. It's not to be a drama time. It's only if we have wins. Other than that, it doesn't come up. We just keep it separate. I think it's super important. The third thing I think of is when you ask that question, we developed in December of 17, we developed through elite entrepreneurs who trains businesses to go from 7 to 8 figures. We developed our mission, purpose, and values. And the reason I'm relating this to the family piece is this: it's company. But the fact is, whether you're family or a team member, we've got a great team now. We just had our offsite with 14 people at it. When a decision comes forward, it's no longer opinion. It's no longer family opinion. It's no longer team members butting heads. It's all about, does it mesh? Does it get us closer to the mission and the purpose? And does it pass the filter of the values? That's why you set that up. And it wasn't something I dictated. This is also important. It was something that as a team we built and we voted on. We said, okay, these are the values we live by. And so it's very easy to hire, fire, accept students, not accept students, make decisions based on those. And I guess the last piece, I think you alluded to it, is the money. We run on Profits First. Mike McAllister's program, Profits First. We have since about 2018. And that has, again, simplified a lot of things, simplified how we hold our accounts, simplified having cash on hand, simplified how we get paid, everything. And so that's, again, a long answer, very good question on the personal and the money side, how we do it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And for our audience, if you're wondering, what would my answer to that question be, is really in a similar way. You call it values and principles and stuff. And I would add, in a way, the goal or the purpose motive, so to speak, right? Like for us, my wife helps, my daughter helps, and we have a few external team members. And when we came together and say, okay, how do we arrange these things? And is there any chance for any friction? What we discovered is what really unifies us, regardless whether business or personal, is ultimately why we're doing it in the first place. Basically, absolutely, the purpose right? And when we say, okay, well, do we really want to work for somebody else? Do we really want to exchange our time for money? Do we really want to dance to somebody else's tune? Or do we really all agree that this goal to getting us to a point where the velocity of money, the performance of investments can actually allow us a certain lifestyle, not just the owner of the business, but all of us, and we're working all together in that direction? I would say that, all kinds of different things, right? You may have found a cool new place where we could go and have a meeting, but it's also a healthy meal, because it doesn't help you if you're successful in the business, but you're sick like a dog because you're not eating right or exercising or all that kind of stuff. So I think the orientation, kind of really starting to develop what's our focus and our purpose, has helped a lot to kind of alleviate anything along those lines. And it sounds like you guys have done a little bit of the same thing. So coming back to what you mentioned earlier, I would assume that our audience is very interested, because I always say, well, from my perspective and the way we go about it, when you got to $15,000, $20,000 in the traditional 20% down, 80% finance deal, you're kind of in the business. But it sounds like you guys start even earlier, which I assume opens the door to real estate investing is not just for rich people, which is one thing that I preach all the time. I'm assuming you do that as well. So can you tell a little bit, maybe a story about a deal that can serve as an example on how with relatively low money somebody can actually get into the door, not just as a student, but also as an investor?
Yeah, and frankly, for personal property too, because my son-in-law Zach and my daughter Caleb did their first house on a lease purchase with minimal down. So, okay, a couple things. So on the purchase side of things, especially if you're new, I like, out of the three things I said, I like the lease purchase for the new person and or the person that has no money. When I started, no money. I've been beat up too badly. So why do I say that? Lease purchase, our agreements that we let our students use is built in with a $10 deposit, literally $10. So transfer of title doesn't happen. Big transfer of money doesn't happen, $10. This is a very simple transaction. Now, you might say, okay, well, what's the upside then? So let me give you an actual story. We have a student, Brian. We've done hundreds and thousands of these now, so I'd like to give you stories. Brian is in Chicago. Brian was an elevator salesman for 17 or 18 years, whatever it was, traveling crazy. His goal and our purpose is to help these students create the life of their dreams. Well, his goal was to stop doing that, right? Even though he made really good money. Brian did his first 10 deals in his first 17 months, maybe 16. And we exit all our deals. Axel, if you probably remember, with 3 paydays, he has amassed in those first 10 deals $760,000 in all 3 paydays that we create, and every one was a lease purchase. Now, as he progresses now, he has all this money coming in. Now he's got his sights on, okay, I'll do some owner financing, or I'll do some subject to deals, subject to the existing financing, because that might take a little bit of money, not a lot, but a little bit to do transfer tax or things like that. So that's why I like it for the new person. But we have those other 2 legs of the stool you can purchase under as well. I like all 3. But my favorites are the owner financing in the sub 2. But I wanted to tell you Brian's story because that's not unique. That's happening all the time in our Wicked Smart community, because that's how the agreements are built, and because there's a system to follow on. And that's pretty cool to see someone do that in just 17 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even if it takes a little longer, and that's what I always say, if you look at what can you typically expect if you take on any kind of job or any kind of profession, it's normally not the expectation that you reach the highest peak in that job, whatever that might be, 2 or 3 years, right? So even if you say, well, 15 months or 2 years or 3 years, maybe real quick for those who are not that familiar with subject to, basically means, like you mentioned, owner financing. So the mortgage that was on the property remains on the property, and everything else, I would say in a nutshell, is basically based on a contract, on a document that both sides sign. And why it's called that, just as a quick explanation, is if the person who is acquiring the property would not honor the deal, then there is the incentive, basically, because the property could fall back on the people who originally owned it and who hold the financing. So that's just a quick explanation, because I find subject to, as much as you and I probably love it and like to do it when you can, it's not necessarily something that everybody is that familiar with, what it means. So can you then describe how that goes from there when somebody basically has done a few deals like that, how your progression would be?
Yeah, how what, sorry?
Now, how people progress, like you said, the money comes in, what would be the next phase then?
Yeah, so what we do, I actually used to do this just with my higher level people. Now we're doing it publicly at our next event. I call it wealth stacking. And what that means is we now take Brian's portfolio, existing portfolio, not newer deals, which I'll answer in a minute, his existing portfolio. And we look at it, we say, okay, this lease purchase, we call it a sandwich lease. This lease purchase has a 3-year term. And the seller might be getting $30,000 at the end of the term. How can we use some of these other paydays we created and take that one deal and maybe discount that $30,000 that's going to happen in, say, a year and a half more out, and give the seller incentive to take it now if we discount it, and that creates more paydays? Or how do we extend the term longer, creating more paydays? All kinds of ways we can do what I call wealth stacking, which we've trademarked, by taking an existing deal and then changing the terms a little bit that are mutually beneficial for you and the seller. Now, that's on existing deals. The progression, to your point, is this. It's what we do now, and it's what Brian's now heading towards. He can now look at a deal that's a subject to deal, let's say, like you just brought this up, so I'll go on that. They're usually people that are stressed, versus my owner financing deals, we go after free and clear properties. These people are not stressed. They don't owe anything on it. So the subject to is typically they don't have the money to pay the transfer tax if that state has them. So it does take a little cash. So Brian will use the paydays generated from the first 10 deals, and he'll get more aggressive to go out and own that property versus lease purchase. The other reason is, just, I'm not an accountant, but I'll say this for people. The sub 2 deals and the owner financing deals, you get all the ownership benefits. That means you can depreciate it. You can you own it, versus the sandwich lease, which is just kind of money in, money out. Yes, good money, but you're not depreciating it. It's not your asset. You're just in the middle. And I'll put a metric on this as I wrap this up. Our 3 paydays average for our family company around 75 to 78 grand per deal. All 3 paydays. For our students around the country, low of 45,000, high of 250. So they're lucrative deals. So when I say he went out and did 10, that's how he got to 760,000.
Yeah, thank you for describing that. And I think it's also in this more recent time, in that sense, important to realize that, at least I would always and do advise our clients to look for the opportunity, if you want to go in that direction, or if there's an opportunity like that, to try to be the owner, because I hope you would agree, Chris, with the appreciation, I was almost about to say insane increase in value that we have seen. I think there's a difference to be looking at what is my current portfolio, like you just mentioned, and how much can I benefit from that appreciation. And then it's more important to be the owner, even to say, okay, if you got, like, I have a situation where we have a deal, or you just recently finished with it, had a deal where the owner had a 4% mortgage on it and was only like 5 years into that mortgage. So we could actually theoretically gotten a lower price mortgage than that in the current environment. But on the other hand, it was actually beneficial for a little while to keep everything going and then get the mortgage based on a new appraisal, where in that time frame that we basically had the deal, just like you described, the property had increased in value by $60,000, right? So you basically get a indirect cash out, almost like a refi cash out, when you actually convert the property and have immediately that money to do a bunch of other deals, right? So this stacking can go in a bunch of different ways, but really only when you're really clearly the owner and you can go to somebody and say, okay, here is what I want to do with the property that I own, right? And so
yeah, and there's all kinds of ways to pivot. And then if there's a listener hearing this thinking, okay, that's great, but I might not have good credit. My credit was in the toilet after 08. So
right.
Just understand that you can buy all these properties that we control without your credit. If you get to the point where you've built it up and you decide to do something like Axel said, perfect. But just understand, don't use that as a roadblock. If you don't have good credit, you don't need it.
Yeah, exactly. And I can only second that, especially in a subject to deal, for example. Unless you really want to work with some sort of a broker or stuff like that, it's really maybe with an advisor like you, Chris, or myself, and the seller, right? I mean, you don't
Right.
need somebody to say, okay, I sign a real estate contract, even in a state like California that has all these stipulations, transfer of title, all that kind of stuff. And there is no money in the sense of like getting a new financing with a bank that checks your credit score, or any of that happening, right? So there are definitely these ways to get into the market, get into the deal. And I think that we both are probably big proponents for people to say, don't listen to those who tell you that real estate investing is only for rich people. Rather become informed, really educate yourself, take some trainings, read some books like your book, Chris, and then really form your own opinion. Is it the right kind of investing? And then you can move forward, rather than just listening to the noise from the outside telling you only rich people can do this. So with coming to the last like 10 minutes of our show for today, I wanted to ask you, we have a few of these kind of preset questions, but not so much diving further down, but something like, and I'm kind of suspecting I know already what you would say, but one of those questions is, if you had a time machine, where would you go if you could go, and why?
Fast forward or go backwards?
Either way, it's a time machine. It goes both ways.
Then I'd be backwards, and it would be to meet some of the people that created the biggest wealth, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers. I happen to live in Newport, and if I look out my window, I can see the cliff walk where they built these houses that would be in the billions today. Right. So I would want to meet them and pick their brain, because that was absolutely incredible. If you go through any one of them, it's equivalent to, say, a Musk today, right? But they did it with hardly any resources, and they built hundreds of millions of dollars of fortune. So I'd go backwards to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said sometimes, because I'm kind of a fan of Garrett Gunderson, he wrote that book, What the Rockefellers Do. I would want to talk to the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and see if Garrett is actually right. The ones screwed it up and the other ones did it the right way. The other question, which is maybe a little bit adjacent to it, and maybe you can pick somebody else, is from people you admire, who would you love to have the opportunity to talk to, maybe other than those in the past that aren't around anymore?
Yeah. Any one of the presidents. So this is not a political statement. That's why I said any one of them, because the pressure that they go through and what they have to handle, I'd want to know the mental game. That's what I'd want to know. I'd want to know what the heck's going on with the mental game, that you can sustain that and be level. So pick one. I could do it every 4 years. It'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. Or have them all come together, or the living presidents.
Oh, that'd be great.
Get interviewed by Chris.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Thank you for sharing that. If you take that last thought, do you have an imagination or something that you think that they probably do that you do to keep sane and healthy and on track?
Well, yeah, I'll have daily routines. There's not one guest on my podcast that doesn't have a daily routine, literally not one. So things like, and I don't want to, this is sort of a bit of stacking as well when I say these things, but it takes years, but things like working out, things like meditation, things like breathing, whether you use an app or not, but focused breathing sessions, reviewing whatever it is you have for a business plan or whatever it is you're working on. All those things need to take place in my world daily, or the days off. So it's just a test. And I'm sure they do it at the highest level. And lastly, I guarantee you, they've had numerous coaches and do still in their life.
Yeah. Absolutely. I can only attest to that and agree. And I have routines as well. When you add something new, if you do, which I'm assuming, at least in all my life, I always changed a little bit, not fundamentally, but a few things. What do you use to determine if it actually works for you, if it makes a difference or not?
This is a good question. I usually go by where I got it, the source. Okay. I'll give you an example. If you were, and this is not to be crass to any type of person, but if you were to go, you said, look, I want to go lose 100 pounds. You would probably do that with someone that has already done that, right? True. And has proven over time that they can sustain it. That's all I'm saying. So I think it's super important. So I examine the source, because everybody has an opinion. Most people don't want you to get ahead of them. So you've got to reach up and challenge yourself to reach up and consider the source before you start adding things to your life. Your time clock is only so long, right? Whatever it is,
Yeah,
86,400 seconds for the day. So that's not a lot of seconds. And so you be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. So let's just hypothetically say somebody told you with a lot of experience that you should run over hot coals. What does it make you say, yep, that worked, I do that again, or don't?
Well, I want to know the result of that one, but yeah.
Well, I mean, Tony Robbins is constantly predicting that, you can overcome your fears by running over burning hot coals and not
Look,
hurt.
I think for someone that he pointedly does that, for someone perhaps that has a bunch of fears, great, if that works. But there are some other tools he does that are phenomenal too. So yeah, I see where you're going, and it would just be if it was applicable to that person, like if they had a major issue with getting over things, that perhaps that works.
Yeah. Well, part of why I bring this up is sorry for all these calls today. One thing that I'm oftentimes running into is that people do what you just suggested as far as, okay, let's see where the information comes from. Is it credible? Does it have good explanation? All those kind of things. And then try it. And I'm the same. If I hear something that I think could help me, I'm willing to try it. But I can also say I need to also and encourage anybody listening and watching us to give yourself a little bit of some kind of measure of what is the result. And an example that I have had is there are a couple of interesting books out there that talk about how can you organize your day better. And one of the things that has been suggested several times is that you dedicate certain windows of time to look at email and maybe not make that one of your first things in the day. And I've tried it a few times, and I find that I feel totally misinformed if I don't at least look at what is out there, what is the most important stuff. I have no quarrels with deleting stuff or kicking it out, or have Nadine take some stuff out that immediately obviously is just advertising and stuff. But to say I don't even look until 12 o'clock in the day, so basically kind of halfway through, it might work for other people and they have good reasons why they suggest it. But I then found that there is some reaction to this change that I didn't like. And then I stopped it again, went back to what I did, and it worked well, right? So I want to sensitize people to say you need to find the approach, the lane, the path to that goal, even if we have the same goal that works for you when it comes to little habits, like when you watch email or look email or review email, all the way to, what I really want is 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 a month enough? Do I want to become an asset millionaire, whatever that might be, and then be comfortable with it and refine it. But don't just automatically say, okay, because I read it in a book or this or that now you have to do that, and you have to basically force yourself into that behavior. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You wouldn't like my answer on email. I don't do it anymore at all. But I was at a point where it'd be a nonstop.
Yeah, but you're comfortable with it, right? So that's
Correct.
the point, right? Like if you, at some point you decided, okay, I can outsource this, or however you handle it, and you found it worked. Like for me, I found I was so disinformed or lacked information that I felt was important. Whether it really was or not is irrelevant. It just felt like that, right? So, okay, cool. Now to wrap things up, Chris, I want to give you an opportunity. How can people get a hold of you? What should they do if they are interested in finding out how, with $10 down, so to speak, they can get going?
Well, I tell you, I can do two things because of when this is. One is the website's simple. It's smartrealestatecoach.com. But secondly, if they will email support at smartrealestatecoach.com and say that they heard you and I on your new show, then I'll give them a 90% off ticket to our next virtual event, depending on when this airs, that we do for a year. And so I think it'd be super important. I want you there, and I'd love to do that favor for your audience, and that'd be really cool. In the meantime, there's all kinds of free stuff on our website and on YouTube, so enjoy that for sure.
Yeah, awesome. And 90% off. Thank you so much for your generosity. That's really great. So if nothing else, it's either a Thanksgiving gift or a Christmas gift, but probably more Thanksgiving, because we're not going to wait very long to get this out. So thank you again, Chris, for being here. Thank you for spending the time with us. And like we heard, if you want 90% off, just go to support at Chris's website and you get the ticket 90% off. Thank you, everybody. And I hear and see you in the next show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and find them there. Sign up for the Apple Podcast link, the RSS feed, the Spotify link, and if you like to talk to me, please sign up for a strategy call at idealwealthgrower.com. So hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.